we've not yet confirmed that anywhere else has trees. Yes, diamonds are valuable, but wood is a billion trillion times more valuable than diamonds are in just our solar system because there's only one place to get wood, and some planets it may be raining diamonds literally.
I'm Millie, and everything's connected if you look close enough. So, for the audience who might not know what it means to get back from Mars, could you explain what that means and where you spent several weeks?
Yeah, so I was at the Mars Desert Research Station as an analog astronaut, and this is the longest running Mars simulation on the planet Earth. To be specific, it's on the planet Earth. And it's designed to test and train people and science and equipment for actual Mars missions in the future. I was there for 2 weeks, living as if I was on Mars, with all sorts of procedures and equipment and things that were all designed to simulate Mars basically as well as we can in most ways. There are certain things that, different analog facilities around the world train for. But, going in and out of the building, there's an airlock, and you have to wait 5 minutes in the airlock between getting in and then actually entering the building, which, not convenient, but helps practice for that situation on Mars. And then there's the fact that when you go outside, you wear a spacesuit. So they're semi-homemade spacesuits that simulate it in many ways, the parts that matter the most, but not in every single way, because these probably cost a couple $100s a piece as opposed to $1 billion a piece. So with any analog, there's going to be certain compromises and certain things that they're very strict on because of that, the type of thing they're studying.
In the past, I interviewed another analog astronaut with Recess, which is the platform I found you through. And he was training on a boat. So, like, I interviewed him while he was on a boat. Like, there were several nuances with that because, like, while you're on a
Yeah.
boat, not great internet connection. So I remember that being a an interesting interview. But yeah, I've done some research into those analog missions, and it sounds really cool, especially the one you were on. So I heard you're the main communicator for your crew. Like, what does that mean, and did you choose that role?
There's, you know, two different ways to apply to MDRS, the Mars Desert Research Station in particular. You can apply as a whole group, or you can apply as an individual. Most people that go there go as pre-organized groups that have trained together, but I didn't have a pre-organized group to apply with, so I applied as an individual, and I was assigned to a crew. That crew already had an actual aerospace engineer that was assigned to the crew engineer spot, which I personally had applied for thinking that would be the most fun. But um, because he already had the spot, I ended up getting assigned as the crew journalist because I did apply saying, like, I'm happy to fill any spot. But I quickly realized that it was actually better to be the journalist because the journalist has to report on everything everybody's doing, which meant that I had to be part of everything that everybody was doing, so I got to be part of more experiments than if I were just the engineer. Also, worked out because the experiment I was doing was a communications experiment, and I still got to help with the engineering and help with everything else. So, and the crew engineer does have more other responsibilities taking care of the facility that, like, I'd be happy to do those, but at the same time, that's just more things to do instead of, more of the experiments themselves. So it ended up working. I'm very glad I was the journalist.
Yeah, that's
So
really cool. Do you have any other like unexpected, responsibilities as that role, or anything else that like you were a part of?
Well, I actually ended up having three roles. The journalist, which every day you have to fill out a journalist report, mission log, and share it with the appropriate places. For our crew, I was sharing it on most social media sites, trying to get it out there for more people to be aware of it, because it is important to share the experiments that are happening, because it's not just, oh, I'm going to do this experiment so that I can build a Mars base myself someday, because, it's not an individual thing, it's a worldwide effort to build a Mars base. So the more this can be shared, the better the experiments can actually perform, especially with the one that we needed more people participating with, the communications delay live meeting experiment that we did, which of course we'll get to later. But I was also, so there's the mission logs, and then there's also photos of the day. You have to send in a certain number of photos, hopefully capturing a little bit of each experiment, and not just the experiment itself, but of people doing the experiment, which sometimes is hard. Like, okay, you need to get a picture of this seed that's starting to sprout and the person that planted the seed in the same shot so you can see both of them, and, not have it be the same shot every day.
Yeah.
So, sometimes it was actually challenging. How do I get people and their experiment at the same time in a way that actually shows what the experiment is, which was tricky at times. I was also assigned as the crew astronomer, so I had to train on how the telescopes work and the procedures to make sure that we don't break the probably tens of thousands of dollars worth of equipment. And I also got assigned a couple days into the mission as the communications officer, simply because we all realized that I could both interpret what was coming over the radio a little bit better, and I could talk clearly through the radio, because I've got ham radio license and experience with radios and stuff like that. So they're like, okay, you're assigned the communications officer. Essentially, if we get a radio call, then you're primarily the one to answer it and help interpret if the just general radio static or whatever was getting in the way. Turns out I ended up using that experience a little bit more later in a great non-dangerous emergency situation. So that was fun. We'll get to that later too. It was a lot of fun being the journalist and being able to communicate for our crew to the world. Yep, definitely. And it's amazing how just talking on a radio, walkie-talkie, whatever, is actually a skill that you can develop, and you can tell who has a skill or not when you're talking to them on the radio. It seems basic when you've been doing it for a summer or something like that. Like, oh yeah, it's just how you talk on the radio. But then somebody new tries to talk, and you're like, oh wait, I used to do that. It really is a skill.
Tell me a bit about the rest of the crew. How did you get on with this crew, and had you ever worked with them before?
This crew was all applying as individuals, though two of them had at least met before and worked with each other a little bit before. It was mostly just a group chat. Once we were assigned together, there was a group chat talking with each other and, planning stuff. All of our experiments overlapped a little bit here and there, and so it did really feel like a good crew. It was interesting, meeting up in the right outside the hotel that they'd been staying at to get picked up, and trying to fit everybody and their luggage and their experiments all into one crew transport shuttle that looks a lot like a old Suburban, and driving out, and so I was like the first getting to know each other type of thing, beyond a group chat. And we worked surprisingly well together. Everybody was there to, science and have a good time and everything like that. And it was a lot of fun, and it was a great learning experience. We had people from 5 different countries, 4 different continents. Like, sometimes you get 5 countries, but they're like all touching each other, so it's like, yeah, no big deal. We watch the same TV shows, we go to the same stores type of thing. But this was, 4 different continents coming together, and so it was very interesting.
Yeah.
And a lot of fun and a great experience.
What was this cultural exchange, and how was it getting to know these different people?
Our commander from Spain, who's been on 5 or 6 different analog missions before that, and we had the crew engineer is Aaron from Virginia. Well, originally Seattle, but came in from Virginia, where he's working for a aerospace company with top secret clearance and, doing cool stuff that of course he can't share, but we just have to assume it's cool because it's top secret. And we have Janavi from India, who's a scientist that's working in a lab to develop a way to build bricks out of Martian regolith. And so she did, that was part of her experiment. There was collecting some of the local dirt that is very, very similar to Martian regolith and see, test a few different things with building bricks out of that. And turns out one of the main problems with building bricks from the dirt on Mars or regolith, the non-living dirt, is that it's not living. There's no bacteria in the soil on Mars, and turns out bacteria makes bricks stronger.
Oh, that's interesting.
The soil on Mars has a chemical has perchlorates in it, and perchlorates kill bacteria. So not only can we not grow stuff directly on Mars, even if we brought the dirt inside a greenhouse, you have to wash the dirt to clean the dirt before you can grow stuff in it. But plants and bricks both want bacteria to be growing in the dirt as well. And so you want a way to not have to wash your dirt thoroughly, because that uses a lot of water, and then you have to recycle the water and all that sort of stuff. So we were experimenting with certain things that you can add that protect the bacteria from the guar gum, from the perchlorates with the guar gum, to be able to make bricks that are stronger, and therefore you can build a structure out of bricks on Mars, and then you basically have a balloon inside that to keep the air pressure in, and the structure protects the balloon so you don't accidentally pop it. And, things like that will make it possible to build bigger things on Mars, so you're not stuck in a tiny little thing. Like we were. The thing that I missed the least on Mars was the size of the bedroom, which, most bathrooms are bigger than the bedroom I had, to, give a bit of a picture there. And the bed was roughly the size of a bathtub.
Yeah, that sounds pretty small and cramped.
So got more bricks on Mars, we can have bigger bedrooms, and overall better experience.
Yeah. So I know that within this mission you had a constrained amount of water. Could you explain how that worked? What did the water go to, and did that affect anything in ways that surprised you?
It was that's probably one of the things that subconsciously stuck the most, was the water conservation, because there's a tank of water outside the hab that was where we got our water from, and if it ran out, then we would have no water. Pretty simple. It's not like, we saw that you used a little bit more water, so we're gonna have to turn it off on you. No, it wasn't, mission control being, stingy or anything. It was, here's the water you have, don't run out before you're done. And so the first couple of days, we were in a little bit of a panic because, crew engineer goes and measures exactly how much water we have left in the tank each day. And he's like, yeah, so we're going to run out a couple of days before the end of the mission at the current rate we're using it. So we need to find new ways to not use water. And that was, before anybody had a shower even. So we're like, wait, we're not going to have any showers at this rate. Like, what's going on here? So we had to pay attention to every drop of water we used. Like, just filling up a water bottle, almost felt guilty. Like, wait, I mean, okay, I know I need to drink this, but I'm using water. So yeah. It was tough. And, all of our food was, or the majority of our food was freeze-dried. So we had to add water to the food before we can even eat it. And, they're like, the only things we were using water for were food and drink and washing dishes and an RV toilet, which uses barely any water, and then, hopefully showers. And surprisingly, washing dishes used more water than anything else. We had to get creative. The first day we're like, we just did normal roommate type thing where you just wash your dishes when you're done with them. But then we're like, okay, so we just use a whole lot of water. We thought about different ways we were using water. Thought, okay, dishes, let's try it. Tomorrow, leave all the dishes until the end of the day and then wash them all at once and see if that uses less water. Well, it turns out stuff dries on. It takes more water to clean it off later. So after a couple of days experimenting with that, we, came up with other options, and the system that we came up with is, like, try and clean out your dishes as much as you can just with your spoon. And then we had a cup of water and soap and a little scrubby pad that we would just dip in that and, like, pre-wash all the dishes just with that 1 cup of water first, so that they're basically all clean and soaked up, and then it's very carefully rinse them off with as little water as possible, and that ended up working out okay. But it was tricky getting the hang of that part, and even now, whenever I, dump some water down the drain, I'm like, no, it's okay now, but it still feels weird a month later to see water going down the drain not used for as many things as possible, like...
Yeah.
When you rinse one dish, dump it into the next dish so that dish can use the same water again. And
You're talking about, so obviously before you wash the dishes, you have to use them. What types of food were you eating in the habitat? And was it what you expected?
A lot of the food was, like, everything has to be shelf stable, meaning stuff that would survive a trip to Mars. So, I mean, some of it is stuff that you'd find in your cupboard. There was some crackers, there was some trail mix, there was, various nuts, there was pancake mix, which ended up being part of our cultural exchange, because we got, turns out not everyone in the world uses pancake mix and has had, chocolate chip pancakes before, so that ended up being a little bit of a tradition because, different people from other parts of the world were suddenly interested in pancakes more often than, because it was this cool new thing, right? So, there's some of that basic stuff that you would expect. There was flour and yeast and stuff like that I would make into, bread for the crew, since I've, made quite a bit of bread in my younger days. And stuff like that. But then there was a whole collection of freeze-dried stuff. And a lot of people aren't familiar with freeze-dried stuff. It's not the same thing as dehydrated stuff. Most people have had something that was dehydrated, and they're like, yeah, I mean, I could kind of tell that it used to be carrots, but at the same time, it kind of felt like it was too hard and flavorless, and, never want to try it again. There's certain things that dehydrate well, and certain things that don't. But the thing about freeze-dried is you freeze it and then have it in a vacuum chamber. So, and then as you thaw it, the water, which is, ice, since it's frozen, sublimates rather than evaporates. So it goes straight from ice to water vapor. That gets sucked out because it's a vacuum chamber. And so the structure of everything is the same. And it actually doesn't noticeably change the nutrients or the flavor or the texture the same way that dehydrating something. Because when you dehydrate something, it shrinks down. When you freeze dry something, you take the water out without changing it in other ways. So you add the water back, let it sit depending on what it is. It could be, 2 minutes or 20 minutes, and you basically can't tell it's not fresh.
Yeah.
And so that's a big improvement for things in space, and especially things going really far like Mars, where you can have those fresh things with the same nutrients and the same flavor, but it'll last 30 years before you open the can. So a lot of people have it in their food storage for, hard times or zombie apocalypse or whatever it is that you're storing food for. So I actually grew up with some of that. I have a sister that sold freeze-dried food, so we'd get samples and, buy stuff just to try it out sometimes. And so it can be surprisingly good. It's not as simple as some things are, but at the same time, it's way easier in some other ways. Like, one of my favorite things was just go grab a handful of freeze-dried chicken that's, just pre-cooked chicken chunks, throw it in a mug with a little bit of seasoning and some hot water, and I've basically got chicken soup in 5 minutes. And I didn't have to cut up any raw chicken or fry it or, doing any of those other things. So it can be way easier to make a meal if you know what you're doing with the freeze-dried stuff. So, and of course, we all smuggled a few things to Mars too.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So, oh yes, we were at where I smuggled a blender to Mars.
Yes.
Donated it to Mars, just left it there. But I used that to grind up some freeze-dried beef and mix it with the black bean burger mix so that they were held together by the gluiness of the oatmeal and the beans, but flavored like the proper ground beef better. And we harvested some lettuce from the green hab that a previous crew had planted, and used some other couple of things. I can't remember what else we put on there, freeze-dried cheese and stuff like that, of course, and we made some pretty good burgers. And so that was one of the favorite freeze-dried or shelf-stable meals that we came up with. So
Good use of materials. I was reading through your mission logs, and in them you reference souls. Before I go into
yes.
some more specific questions, could you explain what you mean by a soul?
So sol is short for solar day, meaning a day but counted by how often the sun rises on that planet. So on Mars, we could say days, but it gets confusing because you're talking Martian day or Earth day, and it's both more and less confusing with Mars because Earth has 24 hours in a day, right? On Mars, you have about 24 and a half hours in a day. So it's very close, but not quite, which means for the first week, you don't really notice you're off by 3 hours by the end of the week. But then after a couple of months, you've had a different number of days. And so that gets really confusing. So when they talk about it on Mars, they talk about sols instead of days. We didn't bother adding the extra half hour a day because it just simplifies, synchronizing with the sun and stuff like that. Some planets, it's more extreme, like, 247 Earth days to one sol on another planet, so that gets more complicated. But with Mars, it's fairly simple.
So on Sol 11, you told a story about how you got a flat tire in a canyon. Can you retell that story?
So, This was fun, especially since a couple days before, I'd had experiment with the battery as well. We trying to get to a particular destination on the map that, according to the map, was approximately how far you could get on 50% battery, because the rule is you can only drive outward until your battery hits 50% on your electric rover, and then you have to turn around and come back. But the thing about batteries is the top 50% goes away faster than the bottom 50% on batteries when their battery meter is measuring voltage. Whereas with the rovers, we drove until we hit 50% battery, and we're still a whole kilometer short of where we were going. And so we're like, okay, I guess we want to make sure we get it back and stuff like that. So we, did our thing where we ended up with the rovers on Sol 9. But when we got back, we still had like 37% battery. So we spent 50 on the way out and only 13% on the way back, which seemed suspicious. I mean, yeah, it was a little bit more uphill on the way out than on the way back, but not by a whole lot. And so, it was like, okay, so yes, the top 50% of the gauge is going to be a lot less than half. So on Sol 11, we're going out and we're just hitting 50%, but, maybe we can go a little bit more, get to like 49%, and then, I'm following the crew astrobiologist and scientist, and I see them suddenly swerve off the path and hit a pile of dirt. And thought, well, that was interesting. I instantly see one of them jump out and back away as if they're panicking to see what the problem was. And the other one, I can hear, even through my spacesuit, the emergency brake being pulled. So they must not be in rough shape if they're, setting the emergency brake and calmly stepping out. So I wasn't panicking. I just thought, well, that was interesting, and I'm glad everybody's safe. So I actually had a smile on my face. But what had happened is there was a little tire, or a little rock embedded in the road that was kind of sharp, that they just barely snagged the edge of it with the edge of their tire, and it twisted the tire so that basically all the rover's momentum went into the sharp part of the rock there, and it just stabbed right through the side of the tire. And of course, with having turned their wheels sideways, it pushed all their momentum sideways, and so they, jumped off the path into a bit of dirt there. And so the reason one of them had jumped out so quickly was because the tire was hissing out air just like in the movies. It only took it about 20 seconds to be completely flat. And so she's driving, hears a sudden, crashes, hears a sudden hiss, and she was thinking, oh, is that gas? Is it going to explode? So she jumped out and ran away. It was an electric one, so, no actual problem with that. But it was quite clear that there would not be a way to drive this rover out. Especially with a front tire, when it's flat, it insists that you turn that way because of all the extra drag on that side, right? So there wasn't a way to drive out, but we were in a little canyon, so there was no reception with the radios at all, or with cell phones at all. So that was a bit of a problem. Luckily, you're required to take 2 rovers on any EVA so that you can get out if there's a problem. So I left them with their rover. First I climbed the nearest hill, tried to communicate, but we were far enough away, and elevation and stuff like that, that we couldn't even hit one of the repeaters that's supposed to let our radios reach back to the HAP. So I left them there and drove part way out, climbed up another hill, tried to communicate, nothing. Accidentally dropped one of my gloves on top of that hill. And then, drove to the next place, realized I was missing a glove, tried another spot, finally get back I drove a good, well, it was about a mile as the crow flies, but probably a mile and a half with all the zigzag windy canyons to get there, and finally got to where I could get to the hab and I could hear the hab coming back. I guess they heard me a little bit before I got there, but I couldn't hear them back. So I'm on top of a mountain, well, small mountain, hill thing, standing on top of my rover, holding my radio in the air, and finally get communication. And I also have communication back into the canyon. It's just, there's not a direct line between them, but I can, get around the corner of the mountain, I guess. So I arrange the rescue party to come get us and keep them updated on what's going on. The thing is, a simple patch kit wouldn't fix, even a tire shop won't ever fix the sidewall of a tire of a car. So a patch kit wouldn't have helped us, and it was an extensive hole. So there wasn't a way to do that, and there's not spare tires with the rovers. So they mission support had to go take a wheel off of one of their rovers and bring it out. They brought a whole truck out, but their truck couldn't get where these rovers could get, and there was some places where the road was washed out by erosion in a way. So I ended up saying, you can try. I'll stay here as a relay. Let me know if you need me to drive you in with my rover. That's what ended up happening. So I had to drive mission support back in there. And the thing is, my rover was at 48% battery when I was with them. I drove back up the hill, so I was at 30-something%. But then I had to drive back down in there and back out. So we were expecting there was a good chance I'd have to get towed home with an empty battery, on the way back. But, again, the bottom half of the battery ends up working a little bit better. And the going downhill, I only used 1% battery to get to where they were. We replaced the wheel, and then on the way back out, I went up to get where I dropped my glove, and which was good because that's the area we were exploring was called Sea of Shells. And if you look at it from a map, it kind of looks a little bit like a seashell with the way the waves of the hills are and stuff like that. But it turns out it's because this used to be a seabed, and on top of that hill, the ground was entirely made up of fossilized seashells.
Ooh.
Which was really awesome.
Yeah.
And the so you can just scoop up a handful of fossilized seashells, and because they're seashells and not bones, you're free to take them. So that was pretty cool. And because I knew that it was seashells up there when I'd gone up there and accidentally dropped my glove was a great excuse to get everybody else to go up and see them, and so that was kind of fun. Then we eventually get out. It took 1% battery to get down to them again, but it took another 13% to get back up the hill. So I was kind of nervous, but managed to get home with still a couple percent battery on the rover. So all in all, we took only 30 minutes longer than planned because we technically got the flat tire on the way out. So it, ended up working okay. We're back in time for another communications experiment with the launch pad on YouTube. And so had a great time with that. But it was a great exercise in communications where sometimes you have to set somebody up as a new portable repeater. The crew after us, I'll mention a little bit more later, one of their things that they were planning on experimenting with was having a radio repeater attached to a balloon that they could put up so that they could communicate from anywhere. Because, it's where the antenna is that makes more of a difference than pretty much anything else. And so being able to just, have a repeater follow you around wherever you want is pretty cool. So
yeah.
If I go back to MDRS, I'll probably build a repeater to bring with me to be able to leave on top of a hill before I go down into canyons or something like that, if there's not already more repeaters in place.
Yeah.
That'd be fun.
So, what would you do anything different? So, I know you said the repeater, like having a repeater, but if you didn't have that repeater and you were back in a similar situation, is there anything you would have done differently?
For that situation, it was as simple as somebody, missed a small rock on the trail, basically. And it was actually, they stopped right before the rock to wait for me to get back through a little bit because I was, like 30 seconds behind right before that because there's some pretty rough terrain to get through at times. And so I had just caught up to them after being, losing sight for like 20 seconds or something like that. So they waited for me, saw that I was there, they started going again, and that way they weren't, the rock was just right in front of their vehicle, which is a good thing because they didn't have time to get up to speed, but also it meant that, it was just right in front of them so they couldn't see it. Visibility is limited with a spacesuit on. So, overall, to prevent that from happening, I don't know what there is. To improve the rover experience overall, or radio experience, I wouldn't mind mounting the antenna on top of the helmet because that's one of the things I noticed while I was the relay is communicating with them, is that sometimes it was easy to hear them, sometimes it wasn't. And that's probably because the radios are strapped to our chest, and if you're not looking exactly the right way, and with how twisty-turny those canyons are, they probably didn't even know what direction to look for where I was, because they couldn't see me. I'm pretty sure our radio signals were actually bouncing off of canyon walls to get to them in the first place and stuff like that, so it may be that, they had to look away from me for a better signal or something. But if the radio antenna is sticking up the top of the helmet or something like that, then you're going to have a better signal no matter what way you look. So some improvements like that would have made it a little bit easier for communication, but I'm really happy with how it played out. But I don't know if I'd say I'm happy that it happened, but I'm happy that I was there to help when it did happen.
Yeah, yeah. It just seems like a realistic simulation of that,
Yeah.
like unexpected things that might happen on Mars. So I know you appeared on a Spanish TV show during your time at the Mars Desert Research Station. How did this opportunity come about?
Our commander being from Spain, Murillo was having had done several analog missions previously. She had been on this TV show before, and so she just had a friend at the station like, "Hey, I'm doing another analog. This one's an even cooler facility than some of the other ones I've been in, and so come check it out." And so they're like, "Oh yeah, let's do a whole live segment on TV." Due to the time zone differences, in Spain it was like 1 p.m. and for us it was like 4 a.m. So most of it was just the commander talking to them because it's in Spanish, and most of us could understand a little bit of Spanish, but not really speak it fluently. So she did all the talking for the most part, and she gave a little bit of a tour of some of the things that we do and stuff like that. And basically, the rest of us were just there to smile and wave on that particular one.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like, while you were on this mission, was there a moment that you forgot that this was a simulation or where it felt like you were actually on Mars?
Pulling up to the station was cool. I'd seen pictures of the outside many times. I'd seen pictures of the inside, and stuff like that. And so that was cool and all. But walking into the hab and looking out the window for the first time, it's a round porthole window. There's a coating on the inside of the window for like blocking UV light a little bit and stuff like that, but also gives it just a little bit of an orange tint, which means it just looks a little bit more like Mars outside. And just looking out the window and seeing just the Martian landscape and the science dome and the green hab and the observatory out the window, it just like brain clicked like, oh, you're on Mars in a strangely powerful way. Like it looked like watching the movie The Martian or things like that, but even more realistic. Like, it's just like, wow, that's real. I'm on Mars. And we adjusted our language a little bit to, match it. Like, a part of calling it Sol instead of Day helps you feel like it's on Mars. And because a lot of this is, psychological experiment as well. It's not just how annoyed do people get when they have to wait 5 minutes going in and out the front door, but the whole psychological effect and stuff like that. And it's strange. Certain things made it just feel more and more real. Other things would make it feel a little bit less real at times, like when like the land right around MDRS is research land from the government that like other people aren't allowed to stop on, but there's other state land that other people are technically allowed to go to that we're allowed to go to as well. So occasionally, while driving the rovers on EVA, we would see a car go by and it'd be like, oh, look, another pressurized rover full of aliens, So we'd refer to anybody that wasn't from the station as aliens, because that would explain why they're not in a spacesuit. Just as like a funny way to try and, keep in simulation, but like not be too weird about it. So it was fun. And you definitely have to use your imagination for some parts of it. But other parts of it just like really felt a lot like Mars. So between us, we spoke 7 different languages. And so there was, some, we spoke primarily in English because that was the one that everybody shared and stuff like that. But there was a lot of words that when you're talking to somebody that's, not familiar with English, you wouldn't use the complicated space terms to talk about stuff generally. But because everybody was into the space industry to an extent, we used those complicated terms, but then we'd get stuck on smaller, normaler words, you might say, that were... So it was interesting. It was interesting seeing the more technical stuff and was easier than the less technical stuff at times.
Yeah.
So that was fun.
Yeah. So, kind of shifting gears into the main experiment you performed. So, I know your main experiment was about delayed live communication. What did you find, and can you explain a bit more about that for anyone who's listening and might
Yeah.
not know what you did?
The speed of light is the speed limit of the universe. We can't get anything to go faster than the speed of light. Some theoretical or, stuff like that. But we can't control anything going anywhere near that fast except light itself. We can blink a flashlight to send Morse code, or we can blink a radio, which is basically the same thing as a flashlight, just in colors we can't see. We can send radio waves back and forth. They go the speed of light because they're just a color of light we can't see. But even at the speed of light, which seems incomprehensibly fast when we're doing short distances like between places on our own planet, the speed of light actually seems slow when you're going between 2 planets, because when Earth and Mars are the closest, it still takes about 4 minutes for the signal to get from Earth to Mars. And when Mars is furthest away, it takes 22 minutes for a signal to get from Earth to Mars. And possibly longer at that point, because the furthest away, it's, the sun's in between and blocks stuff, so you actually have to go around it through a satellite relay, and so that's a longer trip. So that means if, we were to have a conversation where I say, hi, how's it going? And you say, good, how are you? By the time that exchange has happened, it could have been an hour. Yeah. Which gets in the way of natural style of communication, where I ask a question and then I wait for you to answer, and then you answer, and then, I respond to your answer, whatever, right? It doesn't work when there's that long of a gap in between. So as far as I know, everyone else that has done Mars simulations has either skipped that part and not had a communication delay, or they've just given up and they send emails back and forth. Most people don't bother trying like continuous back and forth between Earth and Mars, even in simulation. I've found zero evidence online of anybody ever trying this before. They just give up and just send files back and forth with a little bit of a delay on the sending. Um, I felt like there should be a way to make it work anyway. And at first I thought, hey, maybe I'll just try and teach a class where I'm talking the whole time, but I don't get what people are saying back constantly. But that felt like it might be a little bit chaotic because if somebody asks a question, I have to listen to them asking the question. So that means I have to pause and listen to that whenever somebody asks a question. And it might end up, then that pause of me pausing there means that later there'll be me pausing when nobody's talking on their end. And so there'll just be a bunch of awkward pauses. But that's kind of where everybody else stops. I kept thinking about it and thought, what if we just take pre-scheduled turns? Because just using 5 minutes of a delay as an example, if you and I were to schedule a conversation on, between Earth and Mars, and just, we're going to start at exactly this time. If I start talking and you start talking both at the same time, it'll take 5 minutes before we start hearing each other. And as soon as we start hearing each other, or when we see the 5 minute mark hit, then we stop and we listen to the 5 minutes that the other person was talking. And then as soon as we're both done listening to that 5 minutes, then it's our turns to talk. And technically, we're always going to be talking at the same time and always listening at the same time, but we'll never interrupt each other in the process. And so you can have that constant communication. When you ask a question, it will take me 5 minutes to hear it, and then you another 5 minutes to hear my answer to your question. So it's a whole 10 minutes after you ask the question before you get an answer. So the first couple things that we say back and forth will be not in response to each other, but that entire conversation, we could talk for an hour and have had 6 different turns each of talking, and 4 of those turns would have been responding to things that each other had said. So it's an actual conversation, and like the entire time we can see each other to know that we're still there. We can see that we have an influence on that. And so, yeah, I could have done an experiment with a video call with, another analog astronaut or something like that. And, it would have probably felt a little bit more scripted because it's, oh yeah, 2 professionals proving that this is possible. But I wanted a more honest audience, or more honest other side of the conversation. And so I got a bunch of my students and we hosted an event where the students were on Mars, or sorry, the students were on Earth, and my crew was on Mars, and we were taking turns, but with 10 minutes at a time instead of 5 minutes in the example. And it meant that, and because we weren't actually, having 10 minutes delay in each direction, we just had our stream 20 minutes delayed on the way out, which meant that we had to start talking before the meeting started. But the timing still works out for a constant communication both ways. And it, yeah, there was a couple of weird bugs. Like for some reason, they couldn't hear us for the first minute and a half of us talking, even though we didn't change anything after that minute and a half. It just randomly started working or something. I don't know. But the, we were able to get through it because we had those people on Mars or on Earth to cover for us that were live with the rest of the kids. We had thousands of kids watching on Earth. And we had the people on Mars, answering questions back and forth. And so we were able to have a great event with back and forth. And according to the surveys that people submitted, it everybody felt like it was an actual live conversation, not a pre-recorded video that was just, being played every now and then or something along those lines. Like they could ask a question and we would answer the question. Knowing that if I tell you a funny story, I will see you laugh later, then, you know, approximately 10 minutes later after I tell that story, seeing you laugh, I'm like, oh yeah, she's laughing at the funny story I told. That type of thing makes it feel like an actual human conversation, which is very different from watching a YouTube video or something pre-recorded, because pre-recorded you could have like stopped and like erased something and gone back, but if it's live both ways, it has to be, as close to genuine as you can get, because you can't rewind, you can't edit, you can't, do all those things. It's an actual back and forth conversation. And that's something that's going to be really important when we actually have people on Mars. Because one of the biggest things or most common things practiced with these analog missions around the world is the isolation. And that's one of the things that people are most worried about in some of these long-term space missions is the isolation. And there were studies done, back in the space race to the moon, where people were thinking like, okay, if our country loses the race to the moon, well, that means we have to go to Mars to be able to win a bigger race. And so they started, stuffing people in small rooms together for months on end to see if they would survive a trip to Mars. And things usually didn't go well. People get sick of each other after months being stuck in the same room. And so these analog missions have been testing how to deal with that isolation a lot. But I can't find any record of NASA or anybody else ever testing live interaction back and forth to deal with that isolation. It doesn't feel as isolating when you can have an actual live conversation back and forth, even if there's a weird delay and you have to take turns talking. It's still live, right? So
Yeah.
I personally think it's a very important experiment that luckily reached a decent sized audience, and hopefully more people will continue to experiment with it and stuff like that going forward. But I can't find any record of anybody doing it. AI can't find any record of anybody doing it. So I'm partially confused, like, why would nobody try it? It's actually pretty simple to set up and test and stuff. And it's totally something that's doable. Like you couldn't use Zoom between Earth and Mars simply because Zoom is set up that if the other person's not connecting, then it says, oh, there's a problem, right? But,
You'd have
there
to
are definitely ways to do it.
I know you mentioned you had like a huge amount of participants within this experiment. How do you feel about having that kind of response to what you're doing?
At first, I thought it was just going to be a couple of my students, just, to test a couple of things out, maybe a couple of times. But when we happened to reach the right person at Outschool that could, make it a much bigger thing, um, that was exciting. um, and we got in contact with Let's Talk Science, who got me the tomato seeds that have actually spent time on the space station. They actually were originally planning on having a whole extra set of experiment just with them, but it was going to be the same week that the Artemis 2 launch was scheduled, and Let's Talk Science is a big Canadian outreach thing, and they were having another live event with Jeremy Hansen, who was about to fly to the moon. So being bumped from doing the experiment with them by somebody going to the moon, I mean, that's not too bad of a reason to be canceled. The fact that I was, technically competing, I mean, obviously I lost the competition, but I was technically competing for a live event with Jeremy Hansen. So, then of course that mission got delayed, so, could have happened anyway. But they just, invited their 40,000 classrooms across Canada to our main event. And so, it ended up just being a, awesome thing. More kids were able to get involved and interested and see that, space is closer than they think.
Yeah.
So
So, as you said, space is closer. So, as we look to expand to space for travel and for setting up colonies, what are your thoughts on like the Mars-focused missions versus the moon? Like, do you think next we're gonna go to the Mars or to the moon or to both?
that is a great question that has been very widely discussed recently.
Yeah.
Because SpaceX, from its founding, has been focusing on building a city on Mars. There are kind of two or three main uh, perspectives on why to expand into space. You've got Elon Musk and SpaceX, and many others as well, who want to build a city on Mars as a backup plan in case Earth gets destroyed either by humans or by an asteroid or by whatever, right? The fun catchphrase for that is there aren't any dinosaurs right now because they didn't have a space program.
Yeah.
If the dinosaurs had a space program, maybe they'd still be around, either redirecting the asteroid or having moved off planet. You've got Blue Origin and Jeff Bezos. The slogan of Blue Origin is for the benefit of Earth, or the motto. And they want to move the industries of Earth off planet. Not to get rid of Earth or to move away from Earth, but to save Earth from ourselves. They want to put factories in space and mining in space. There are plenty of asteroids out there with all of the materials that we mine for on Earth, and nobody really cares if you go eat an asteroid with a big machine, but it can damage the Earth the way mining is done in a lot of places. And so if we can replace that entirely, not say, oh, to save the Earth, we're going to all live in tents and not have technology, most people aren't on board with that. But if you can say you get all the technology you want, but also Earth is preserved as if it's a state park, it's just a global park now that you can't pollute and you can't, you know, harm things on Earth. Like, let's preserve Earth because Earth is the best planet we've ever seen. We have not found anything close to Earth, um, especially in our solar system. But like even exoplanets that we've seen, like we've not yet confirmed that anywhere else has trees. Yes, diamonds are valuable, but wood is a billion trillion times more valuable than diamonds are in just our solar system because there's only one place to get wood, and some planets it may be raining diamonds literally. Elon Musk was so much into Mars. At first, he wanted NASA to like do Mars missions just to inspire people and because that's cool. He figured out 25 years ago, or a little over 25 years ago, that nobody's planning on going to Mars in the near future. So he tried to buy a rocket from Russia and launch a tiny greenhouse to Mars, and just to have a little camera on a tiny greenhouse on Mars, just to show life on Mars, to help inspire people to actually do something with it. But ended up not uh, having success in buying a rocket because, like, every time he talked to the people about buying a rocket, the price just kept going up because they're like, oh, yeah, you just made money off of selling a website, and so we're just going to take all your money. And so he ended up founding SpaceX, but SpaceX's main goal has always been building a city on Mars. Just like a month ago, SpaceX said, we're shifting our main focus from Mars to first building a self-growing city on the moon.
Yeah.
Which came to as a big shock to some people, but not to everybody. The thing is, the moon is a great way to practice for Mars, because anything that'll work on the moon will most likely work on Mars, but you can launch to the moon every few days, and it only takes 3 days to get there. You can only launch to Mars every 26 months, and it takes 6 to 9 months to get there. So it's a lot easier to practice on the moon, which will actually probably get us to Mars faster. Like, we'll start going to Mars not as fast, but we'll finish getting to Mars sooner in a way. Like, we'll have more stuff going when we actually go. So it's I think it makes sense to start practicing with the moon. I tell my students all the time that our class reunions are going to be on the moon,
Yeah.
because by the time, 20 years from now, it'll be most likely, there, of course, all sorts of different ways things could go, but most likely you'll be able to vacation on the moon in 20 years. But there are half a dozen new space stations that are actually being built right now. Next year, we're definitely going to have at least one more space station. Within 10 years, we should have 4 or 5 new space stations. And most new space stations specifically mention the ability to book it at like a hotel.
Yeah.
There, at least part of it is going to be for people to vacation. And that's going to be at a substantially lower price than the International Space Station. So, and, Starship is in development, and other rockets that are going to be able to take more than 4 people at a time. And so if you're taking 100 people at a time to space, then it's going to be a lot cheaper. And so it's going to be, a trip to a space hotel for a couple of days will be roughly the same as the price of going on a cruise or something like that. Which, yeah, not everybody can afford a cruise, but a couple million people a year do. So that's a big difference from the fact that we've had only like 650 people ever go to space at all in all of history. So things are going to be changing quite a bit. And that's one of the things that when students come to my classes, one of the things that a lot of them don't realize before they participate in these classes is that space is so much closer than they think. Both physically, it's only a 1 hour drive down the highway if the highway were straight up. And they're going to be able to go to space sooner than they think. And they're able to actually start participating in the space industry right now. Like, if you want to get involved in the space industry, you can. I've got students that have literally named actual orbital rocket launches that, took satellites to orbit. Catch Me If You Can from Rocket Lab was a name suggested by one of my students, and the CEO of Rocket Lab tweeted back to him like, hey, that's a good idea. You just named the next launch. Like,
Yeah.
that's kind of a big deal. And, it's going to make a difference in his life going forward. I've had students that have actually sent experiments to space with the Cubes in Space program. And I've had, one of my students was on the very first crew at MDRS that was high school students. The first analog mission that was not over 18, basically. So that's, that's a big deal. And I'm really looking forward to the possibility. I'm looking into actually taking a group of my students to MDRS as a dedicated mission of just my students, which would be incredible and, show the world just how great these kids are.
Yeah. So for the Mars Desert Research Station, are simulations like that and analog missions similar to that, like widely available to participants, or is it more of like a niche experiment thing that requires specialized training? Like how do you get into that?
That is a great question. There are a couple of dozen analog simulations around the world, and most of them you can apply for. Some of them are more private, and like NASA has some that only NASA uses, for example. But there are some that NASA uses for a few months of the year, and then other people can book it other times. Some of them have more strict supervision. Some of them are more open to, you have your group set what rules you're following for the most part, so long as you don't break our facility, because certain experiments, you've only got a certain amount of time. You don't want to spend half of your time pretending that you are on Mars and only half of your time doing the experiment, but you want the conditions that are there as part of the experiment. So, there's different strictness levels to them. Some of them you can only apply as a group. Um, so you'd have to, put together a team first and then do it. But several of them, like MDRS and Lunaries, and which is in Poland, that's a moon-based one. Um, you're able to apply, like anybody can apply as an individual. I don't know any that you can apply to before you're 18 as an individual yet, but they may be opening up to that more soon. It's for MDRS, they do an occasional high school group. So sending in at least an email saying, I want to apply for this type of thing is definitely an option for teenagers. Um, may not go anywhere because there's such a limited number that are doing it so far, but it's worth a shot. Sending it off to other places saying, I'm interested in doing this as a teenager. At least they'll, when they do it in the future, they'll, know who to send an email to. So it's definitely worth a shot there. Once you're 18, then there are quite a number that are open to that. Again, there's different things that each one are studying. MDRS is more focused on they have the facilities there for you to bring a research project. And so when you apply, you basically apply saying, here's what I can contribute, but more so I want to be able to do this experiment there. And for some of them, they just need you to be a lab rat in their experiment. All of them, they're studying the participants to some degree. And there's studies where you fill out psychological thing every day while you're there. If you want to participate in that part, they're going into a big study that's been going on for decades, and they're seeing what conditions cause people to have different mental states throughout different lengths of mission and things like that, which are very important stuff. You've got your individual experiments, your group experiments, and the overall experiment of what groups did well, what groups didn't, and what factors are in there. Was it the different diet? Was it the different sleep schedule? Was it the different the weather? Could it be that the weather tied into this? So all of these things are all reported every day in the mission logs, and stuff like that. But it's definitely possible for anybody to apply, and you can prepare yourself to fit the application better as well. The more research you do and the experiments that you do on your own, showing that you can, go and do something on your own, getting different qualifications to do that. First aid training means that you'll be able to be the health and safety officer more easily, or just, show that you're able to help the crew more in the case of an emergency. Getting a ham radio license will mean more about the electronics and the communications, and that will help in case your crew gets a flat tire in the odd canyon on Mars. Different things like that will help as well. So yeah, there's all sorts of different things you can do to prepare. Making sure you don't have any addictions that will make it hard when you get there, whether the addiction is energy drinks, social media, or whatever it is. Being able to run your own simulation sometimes. Just, I'm not going to have a phone this week just to see how I would do. There's currently a mission at MDRS right now from France. It's a group of students from France that is there for an entire month, and they have no phones for the entire month,
Yeah.
which, for like 20-year-olds is uh some would rather die. But, is that phone really more important than, making it so you can be an astronaut someday? So it's yeah, it's definitely interesting.
Yeah. So overall, from this experience at the Mars Desert Research Station, was there anything that surprised you most about the experience or something that you didn't see coming?
Yes. Um, I was, of course, surprised at how real it felt. Like I knew I was going to be pretending to be on Mars, but it was, of course, scientific pretending. But like I said, looking out the Hab window for the first time, that was a shock of how real it looked looking out the window. Also, the uh, just those little things each day that um made it feel like, oh yeah, we're on Mars. It was surprising how many of those little things there were. But what surprised me the most, in a way, was right at the end. We were literally loading up the transport shuttle with our luggage to head back to Grand Junction and the airport and stuff. And a couple people walked over from mission support. Now that our simulation was officially over, we were outside without spacesuits. A couple people walked over. They were going to be there the next day for the next mission. And we started talking, and I realized that the next mission included Cody Reader from Cody's Lab on YouTube, which I'm not sure if you've seen his YouTube channel. He's a scientist, chemist, geologist, all of that combined. He's actually built his own Mars habitat just for himself in the desert that has, he's had it running for several years. He's got whole water recycling system, and he's got greenhouses that um, have automatic cycling of different things to water the plants and to, he tracks carbon dioxide, like all sorts of crazy stuff. Brilliant guy with a lot of cool stuff. And I've been watching him for years. One of my YouTube heroes, you might say. And another YouTuber that actually builds space grade spacesuits for fun and, did some really cool work with number of different things. And somebody that had helped with the Biosphere 2 uh, experiment, which is a really serious analog from a few years back that they like had a big biodome out of glass. You may have seen pictures of it where they, had like a completely sealed system, meaning like you don't get oxygen from outside. Like the oxygen you breathe comes from the plants that you plant, and so you have to keep the plants healthy to be able to breathe.
Yeah.
And it was a year-long experiment and stuff like that. Like it was a kind of a big deal. And so these really cool people started chatting about it, and I was telling them about different things that I'd observed there that they should be aware of with the experiments that they were planning to do and stuff. And they actually invited me to join their mission. And that was definitely a surprise. One, like I was a couple hours from possibly meeting somebody, but there's still a couple of details to work out. So, and I had a flight to catch if it didn't work out. So I'm in the shuttle driving to the airport. They say, yeah, let's do it. Um, work out the details and stuff like that. But then I find out that due to procedure with, the whole facility and stuff like that, you can't just jump into a mission that easily. Unfortunately, even though, the commander of the next mission was one of the, board members of the Mars Society that runs the facility, he wasn't part of the people that, like, he wasn't part of the MDRS board, directors and stuff like that. So it didn't end up working last minute, but it would have been an amazing, like, weird thing. Um, but the that the kind of the two powerful experiences that made me feel a whole lot like the Martian in the movie The Martian was one, when I was a relay looking in any direction, I could not see any sign of civilization except for the tire tracks of our rovers and one little post marking where there was a turn on the trail. So other than one little signpost, nothing in any direction suggested any sign of civilization. And so that was like, wow, I am alone on Mars. This is really weird. And then when we were, talking to my crew on the way to the airport about how I was likely going to be driven back to the hab and be alone in the hab on Mars, with my crew flying away, that felt a lot like The Martian as well. Like, wait, I just actually got left on Mars. So that was a big surprise. Now, didn't end up getting to work with them for that new mission there, but we are still in contact, and they want to do another mission next year, and say, yeah, you could probably be part of that. We could use you, and maybe other collaborations before then. So it's gonna
Yeah.
be fun.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty crazy opportunity. It's definitely like those networking connections
Yes.
coming into play. And I'll definitely have to check out that YouTube channel you mentioned. It sounds like a really cool
Yeah.
channel. I like watching channels about like the chemistry and the sciences and space, and so yeah, I'll
Yeah.
check that out.
Yeah. Cody's Lab does a surprising variety of things on his channel, and he does it so casually that if you just saw like a 30-second clip of it, you might think, wow, this guy's going to blow himself up. He doesn't know what he's doing. But when you watch a couple videos, you're like, wow, this guy's a genius. You can tell when people are trying to teach something that they care about and what they're passionate about, and that makes you want to learn, even if it's not super high quality performance, special CGI and all the animations on top. You know, he can teach stuff with a whiteboard or a whatever he's doing more effectively than all the AI videos that are coming out now, because you can tell he cares about what he's doing. And that's what I found has made the most difference in my own teaching is I only teach things that I care about. And so that's how I'm able to, uh, you know, help kids learn stuff. So.
Thanks to Tom Bickmore for sharing his mission with me. If you want to learn more about Crew 328, I'll link his mission logs below. I'm Millie, and thanks for watching.